Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Boys in Motion podcast. We're your hosts, Andrew, Brian, and Tyler, here to break down the tips and strategies you need to excel in endurance sports. This is episode 36, and today we're going to dive into how threshold workouts improve your fitness. If you've ever wondered why so many endurance athletes swear by threshold training, this episode is for you.
Actually super fired up for this episode because I have to get back into some threshold workouts, and it is a complete game changer for your day-to-day running. This is the best way to build endurance, speed, and overall fitness for some nice gains.
Yeah, this is for any runner, cyclist, or triathlete. I think for me, the breakthrough was when I was training for my first marathon. Threshold workouts were the make or break factor. I remember early on in my block, I was struggling every time there was a threshold workout to hold those fast paces for a longer effort. But I kept with it throughout the block, and I noticed a huge shift. By the time I hit my half marathon test race, I was able to basically be holding that threshold pace comfortably for longer sessions. It gave me the confidence in that race to go sub 90, and that boost of fitness from threshold workouts carried into my marathon, helped me exceed my goal. So threshold training can be that kind of essential key to leveling up your fitness gain.
To help set the stage here and just to start this episode off right, let's just define exactly what lactate threshold is. Another way you'll often hear about it is LT, but lactate threshold is the point at which lactate begins to accumulate in your blood faster than it can be cleared, leading to muscle fatigue. So that dang lactic acid that's just building up, and where your legs start feeling a little weird and you feel like you want to slow down, that is what we're referring to when we talk about that lactate threshold point.
Exactly. You've always heard people say when you're working out, you got to feel the burn. Well, for endurance athletes, if you've ever heard a coach or somebody else say, I'm feeling the burn, it's likely they're in that threshold.
That is very true. And you're trying to stay within that pain tolerance, but also, not get it so high that you I guess, the point of no return where you can't shed that lactic acid enough to stop your workout. So it's that fine line between that threshold work, and which is why you work on that to increase your limit.
Exactly. And I think it's worth here taking a step back and defining two other terms, which are kind of the lower limit and the upper limit for what lactate threshold is. So at the lower limit, you have aerobic threshold, sometimes AET. And aerobic threshold is that intensity level like zone 2, where your body is efficiently using oxygen and lactate levels remain low, usually under 2 millimole per liter. And then between that aerobic threshold and what we call your anaerobic threshold exists that lactate threshold. So your anaerobic threshold, sometimes abbreviated to ANT, is that higher intensity point where lactate accumulates rapidly, making, then there's that transition to like zone 5 and 6. So usually zone 4 is your anaerobic threshold. So you can kind of think of that as sort of the limit where you start getting into interval sessions and stuff that you won't be able to sustain for mediums of time.
Yeah, and if you're into some endurance YouTubers such as the great Lionel Sanders, you might also hear these two terms as aerobic threshold as LT1 and anaerobic threshold as LT2. You'll see the athletes, they'll do a session, do a lap of the track, and then prick their ear and see exactly where they are within that threshold. So it is something that for especially professionals is tracked quite closely. But my guess is that if you've clicked on this episode, you are really wondering why threshold training is so essential to your training. Maybe you don't want to be tracking it to the exact minimal like the professionals, but you want to squeeze out as much as you can from all that time you're training. So let's jump into that. And I think one of the main things is that working on your threshold and doing threshold specific training will improve your aerobic capacity without having excessive fatigue. So that being able to do workouts or sessions and doing them hard, but it becomes comfortably hard, and being able to do it for a long period of time. When we think of, if I relate this to running, the threshold pace is generally around that half marathon pace, where it's not like a 5 or 10K where you're super uncomfortable, your legs are burning the whole time. It's very fast, but you feel pretty comfortable and control the whole time, as long as you've worked that, as long as you've done the appropriate threshold work.
I feel like it's kind of a dial, and once you work on it, you could kind of dial it in easier as you get better with it. But at the beginning, it's kind of wonky, and like you said, you kind of gotta hone in on that threshold pace, and you feel comfortable. You could push it a little bit further when you have to, but also you could pull back if you're feeling it's a bit too hard or based on race conditions. So I think, and like what Brian mentioned earlier as well, is it's a big thing is it gives you confidence to perform in those race specific environments, and really knowing that you've been pushing those paces or times in training sessions for threshold workouts really says to your brain that you could push that for a longer period, and everything should work out.
Yeah, exactly. In that training block that I was talking about at the start of the episode, my threshold workouts were at right around my half marathon pace goal. And so I kind of knew that if I could do all those workouts at that pace, then come race day, which really was still a test race on tired legs, I thought, I had the confidence and the belief that I could hold that for the full half, and it worked out. I've also seen a really good analogy that I think you guys will agree with. Tell me if you do. But it's a car analogy, and you think of threshold work like driving at highway speed. It's fast, but controlled versus an all out sprint.
That's true. It's you're driving on a highway, you're controlled, you got the cruise control on, but on the drag races you could slip out and bang into the wall. So that's pretty accurate to me.
Yeah, especially the slipping into the wall and banging out if you're at that 5K or below pace. So I did pull a few research papers, and it was sort of like a meta analysis of a few papers that looked at research on threshold work. And I think some of the key things was, one, threshold training helps improve oxygen uptake at that metabolic threshold, so that leads to better endurance. And then two, is that a lot of the highlights from that review highlighted the importance of tailoring lactic threshold training programs to individual needs. So it's not a one size fits all. And that really comes down to, I think, the paces and whether or not you have experience running or even cycling at that intensity.
The big key there is, we're all trying to increase endurance and improve our times in general, right? So I think with these studies showing that it's improving your metabolic endurance and helping out with shedding that lactic more efficiently in the long run, I think it really just stems from helping overall fitness in the long run.
Now, like something else that I'm curious about is like who is actually benefiting from this threshold training. We kind of talked about for running and kind of half marathon specifically, that is kind of the pace that you're running at. But really, I think the who benefits from it is pretty wide range. Of course, half marathoners, just to extend that endurance and improve that sustained race pace where you're in those more, comfortably hard zones. But I think even for, those 5K, 10K runners to build a bit more stamina and be able to hold higher intensities for longer, you do get a lot of benefits. And then What do you guys think for kind of triathletes and cyclists? What distances and disciplines do you think benefit from it the most?
I was going to say, bringing it to the other way now, the longer distance things that, let's say, I'm more involved in with the long distance triathlons. I think threshold work, I still try to get in my training block for big long distance races. I think it really improves on just generally your zone two speed and efficiency at zone two. Working those higher limits kind of ups your lower limit as well. So your bar just keeps raising. We always talk about that triangle. Your bar is raising on the lower end as well. So I think you get more efficient on that zone two. Your zone two becomes, if we're talking about heart rate, I find my heart rate gets a little lower for the same amount of effort, or you could increase the pace for that same heart rate. So you kind of see sometimes your time's getting better with the longer distances, and just a couple beats or a couple seconds per kilometers really adds up along 12 or 24-hour race. So I think that helps.
Yeah, and it's no different. Beneficial for runners, beneficial for triathletes, and the overlap there is like time trialists, cyclists, and really every segment of cyclists will benefit from lactate threshold work. And so, why does LT training help for, let's say, those time trialists? Well, it assists you with getting better at sustaining high levels of power for extended periods of time because you're getting comfortable there. And a lot of those workouts would be sort of those longer, like 2x20 workouts. For road racers, for example, especially climbers and people who love being in breakaways, well, you need kind of those long solo efforts and attacks. And a lot of the time, it's going to be near threshold work to help you break away from that peloton up a hill or just kind of on rolling hills as a breakaway. And then lastly, like sprinters and crit racing, you're essentially for sprinters especially, you need to recover quick between those efforts of all out and also be able to stay in the pack with the rest of the peloton. And in crit racing, it's a lot of surgy and then managing the pace repeatedly, and a lot of that benefits from VO2 especially, but you're basically at that lactate threshold heart rate and intensity for the whole race until the end.
And a couple things you mentioned there that I want to touch on again is that surge up and down, or kind of the interval pattern of higher efforts and then kind of recovering. So I think tailoring your threshold workouts properly also helps you increase that lactate clearance easier, and also helps you just recover faster, so you could get into that next surge just that much quicker than the other guy.
For sure. And I think for athletes, it's important to keep in mind like the kind of race you're training for. Like a marathoner, maybe you want to focus on some longer threshold workouts where those segments and those intervals are slightly longer in distance or time. Whereas maybe a crit racer, those attacks are going to be happening every kind of like 8 minutes. It's surgy, let's say. Well, then you want to focus on those slightly smaller but maybe a little bit more intense intervals throughout that same session with the same goal of improving your fitness for that race, despite the fact that that race might be different.
Kind of like the BIM Ride.
Yeah, you need an 8-hour threshold workout for it.
Talk about surgery at those stop signs is all I'm saying. But to take a bit of a sidestep away from the sciencey bits of why threshold training is so important, I think for me personally, and from talking to different people, the mental aspect of these sessions, I think, is just a huge key for building confidence towards improving your race performance. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Threshold workouts are, in my opinion, some of the toughest workouts because they're at a fast enough pace that they do feel hard, especially early on in the block, but they're also long enough that there's a lot of repetition at that hard pace that as you move into more VO2 work, the quickness of it and the short duration makes that feel a little bit easier. And then if you're moving to an event that is longer and is more comfortable, it makes those paces feel actually slow by the time you've really built up your threshold. So I think the mental piece of these workouts is huge for your race performance.
Big
Frig,
agree.
100%. I'm gonna snip that up and put it in a short because I think that hit the nail on the head there. The mental aspect, and then the gap in speed between potential race pace and those threshold workouts. Those are the two keys on why it's so essential, I think.
And they fire me up. I know I haven't done a marathon block in about 6 months here, but I remember having that on the schedule for the week. It was the workout I would look forward to, either in a good way or a bad way. And if you're executing that, it's a big boost to confidence, big boost bringing you into that next week and just ready to crush an even longer. They're usually they grow in length usually, so you're ready to crush an even longer lactate workout. So it's really good.
Yeah, that's perfect. So let's talk about how to structure threshold workouts and what the different kind of threshold workouts are. Maybe Andrew, you can dive into the world of running. I'll do cycling, and Ty, you can wrap us up with some tips for triathletes.
Yeah, for running, the main piece is just going to be that you are going to be running a portion at your threshold pace. And as we mentioned before, that's around your half marathon pace. So if you haven't done a half marathon recently, maybe use VDOT to try to help you estimate around where the ballpark is. And if you kind of have a goal target half marathon pace, that's kind of what you should shoot for. So you want to make sure that you properly warm up for these sessions because it is going to be a big session. So I would target anywhere in that 15 to 25 minutes to make sure you're properly warm. Maybe do a couple strides just to get the legs moving. And then you're going to want to do a certain amount. Generally, it depends where you are in your block, but let's say maybe 20 to 30 minutes at that threshold pace. So pushing, let's say your goal half marathon pace is 4 minute and 30-second kilometers. You're going to be around that target, but just keep in mind that it should be based on effort, and depending on the conditions of the day, how you're feeling, how beaten down, you might be slightly off that, and that's okay. And let's say it's even super hot on a day. This is something that I've done quite a bit, especially in summer training, is that I might break that into two blocks where then I have an off kilometer and then I jump right back into it. So there's different ways to structure it, but the main idea is that you're doing a sustained effort at threshold and then coming back down and doing a cool down.
Yeah, I love that. And I think the other kind of run that you might see is a progression run, right? Where you start at a slow pace and then throughout the run, you gradually get to faster and faster paces as you get closer and closer to the finish of that run. For the cyclists in the room, I think the number one thing that you'll see is what they call sweet spot training. So a lot of cycling is based off your FTP, and we'll dive into how to kind of measure and track threshold progress later on in the episode. But sweet spot training is similar, but it's usually a little like more intervals. Sometimes it's like 5 by 6 minutes of kind of a certain amount of effort. And the shorter the effort is, the higher the ratio will be to your FTP. And then you also have, very similar to that running workout, just threshold intervals, which will be those longer pieces, but you might only have 1, 2, or 3 of these longer intervals of effort, sort of around that like zone 3 to like low zone 4 effort.
That is true. Mixing those up too, I think week by week, not just doing the same type of workout in general, it does help with the variety of impact on the muscles, whether it's biking or running. I find those longer threshold are definitely different than the shorter pieces with the few minutes at a time with some rest in between. So it's good to mix it up as well. The good thing, the other thing is too here now for our triathletes in the room is you just pick and choose what you want out of each workout. You could do this, you could do that, but a big thing that I do like doing is brick workouts and incorporating a little bit of threshold within the brick workout, usually a shorter one. Longer bricks are for another another subject, but our short bricks usually tend to be like under, let's say, an hour and a half or 2 hour brick. So you get a good, I'll say 70% of your workout will be the bike portion, and then 30% will be the run. And you could either go with the threshold piece in the bike and then try to maintain, a zone 2 run, or just run off the bike on fatigued legs, which will be helpful obviously later on in a race. Or you could do it the other way around, is maintain, a zone where you can sustain that pace for your bike piece, and then do a progression run off the bike to try to push that pace, to know that you could push those paces off of your bike. So you could kind of play around with those paces and different types of threshold workouts and at the end of the day, increase your threshold.
Yeah, one of those spooky workouts that I joined you and the Try guys on was with Alex and
That's the one I
Kyle.
was thinking. Yeah, that was
Yeah,
wild.
yeah. So for reference, Andrew, we went up in the Gatineau Hills in Ottawa, did a nice long bike. They had actually been swimming before, but I joined them on the bike portion, and then hop off the bike onto the two-leg express, and Alex every kilometer would just drop the pace by about I don't know 10 seconds or so, and by kilometer 9 I think he had managed to drop both Tyler and I. It was
Yeah.
impressive. He's a sick puppy.
And didn't say anything. That was the most disgusting part too. He's just like, yeah, we'll just do a quick run off the bike, and he's just like, every kilometer, just another 10 seconds, another 10 seconds, and then you see me drop at about kilometer 7, and then I think we did 10 there, and then Brian did another couple with him, then dropped again, and then he kept going. It was
Yeah,
wild.
by the time that pace was like I think like 4:15, I was
Yeah, that's
kaput.
what I was
There
gonna
was
say.
no chance. Especially tired legs, like the triathletes. Gotta hand it to you guys to be able to kind of combine both in the same event is tough.
Something I'm curious about with triathlon specifically, like if you're just biking, just running, these threshold workouts are demanding. You're probably doing them once a week at most. But with triathlon, how are you managing that load across all the disciplines? Like, what would that generally look like as far as workouts? Do you cycle throughout weeks? Do you stack multiple in the same week? How do you normally go about
Yeah,
that?
in my most recent one, it depends on the time in the block. Like early on, I'll do just a run specific threshold piece, a bike specific threshold piece. On Depends how much volume you're doing, but try to get in an easy run, easy bike, and a threshold run, threshold bike per week early on, but shorter distances. And then later on, you kind of I would kind of go to bi-weekly, but incorporate those longer brick threshold workouts. So you kind of decrease the frequency, but increase the volume slash intensity as you get closer to your race specific needs to, right? Like if I'm doing a Olympic or just under a 70.3, I'll keep that speed up almost weekly. But if I'm getting into those longer distances, I'll do the speed work, but really increase the volume instead.
Yeah, I think that's key. And I also think like managing that properly, not diving into too many threshold workouts too quick, can help save your body and therefore your race. So let's move on to how to measure and track threshold progress. So, of course, there's a number of different metrics that we can use across the different segments of athletes. But I think really the key here to judge that proper pace is your threshold effort should feel comfortably hard, and generally kind of your max sustained effort in a non-racing scenario is threshold you should be able to hold for like 30 to 60 minutes without fading drastically.
Yeah, I think in running, like the half marathon is just like this is why I think that this distance is liked by so many is because you can go out, feel pretty comfortable the whole time if you're racing it properly, not be completely legs not completely on fire at the end and actually able to hold it at the same time. The marathon at the end, depending on your fueling and your training, your body can start to fall apart, and anything lower than the half marathon is just your body's on fire the whole time. So it's just kind of it's a great distance, and it's one that I haven't raced full out. I use it as a tune-up, but it is a very fun distance. But and just to, if you're trying to figure out what that threshold pace is, if you're either thinking of training for one or just looking for these workouts, it's great to use, we mentioned it before, the VDOT calculator to put in your time from a recent race. So in this, let's say you've done a 5K recently. If you search VDOT calculator, you can put that in. So I'll just go over a couple here. If you've done a 30-minute 5K, that would be the equivalent of a 6:03 per kilometer threshold pace. So that means that if you ran the 5K in 30 minutes, if you're doing a threshold workout, it would be at around 6:03 per kilometer. Or let's say if you were wanting to do a marathon in the near future, you might want to be targeting around 6:03 or ballpark for that race. And then for a 25-minute 5K, it would be a 5:16 per kilometer threshold pace. And for a 20-minute 5K, that brings you down to a 4:16 kilometer pace. So you can kind of see how those 5K race times are associated with the race, and how they just keep coming down with that speed.
Yeah, and I gotta say that's pretty damn accurate. Like I'm at the 20-minute 5K mark, and my half marathon time, which you see as akin to threshold pace, was within 1 second of the VDOT calculator. That's VDOT. The VDOT calculator almost has that bang on. And I can comfortably go out and do threshold work at that 415-ish pace. So it's definitely accurate. One thing that I'm really interested in is as the 5K time increases, the gap between the 5K time and the threshold time decreases, right? I don't know why that is necessarily, but I think maybe a longer 5K, you're kind of at that threshold pace, whereas when you're running a sub 25K, you're beyond your threshold pace. Could be because you're running for shorter time.
Yeah, that definitely could be. And yeah, and I also think that all of the times of like your threshold to the different zones start to collapse as you get faster.
That does make sense though. If you're doing a slower 5K, like Brian mentioned, you're kind of already at your threshold.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so I think that makes sense for running. Now we can dive into cycling. Cycling is it's an easier sport for amateurs to really get good data on because there's this benchmark of an FTP, or a functional threshold power. And that's fairly easy to test for if you either have a bike computer and power pedals or an indoor smart trainer. So it does require equipment, but hey, cycling's an expensive sport, so you probably have already dove in and gotten that smart trainer, let's be honest. And the way you could do this as a field test is a 20-minute all-out effort where FTP would then be estimated at 95% of that average power output for that 20 minutes. And then your threshold pace, I mean, usually it's around your FTP. Sometimes it's a little shorter, or sometimes it's a little smaller, but generally it's in that like 85 to 95% of your FTP that you would end up holding during a threshold piece or sweet spot training, whatever it might be. There's a few other FTP tests out there that can also help you estimate this.
I got a nice one again on the trainer. You could do a ramp test. That's you'll have to correct me here. I haven't done one in a while, but is it increases every minute your power?
Yeah, I would say like basically the ramp tests, you increase power output until you fail, and usually it's a shorter than 20-minute test.
Yeah, but it ramps the wattage up kind of quicker. Yeah. And I guess another conventional test that you could see in sports clinics is a lab test where they hook you up to a machine kind of similarly to a VO2 max test on the treadmill. They hook you up in an indoor bike and calculate your oxygen levels and all that fun science stuff with your blood to make sure you're not over that lactate limit while you're pushing out your wattage.
Yeah, and I was looking at some general research like before this episode as we were putting it together. Like some people just recommend, at your FTP for your threshold work if you're doing longer intervals. So that's how you can do it sort of at home bootleg. But there is, and we talked about this at the beginning of the episode, the true scientific way to do this, which is using blood lactate tests. And Andrew, you kind of talked about the prick. How does it work exactly for these athletes? Do you know?
Based on my very very limited knowledge on this, since it's I'm not too into the data, and I'm going more by feel, and I don't have access to this equipment, but it's you do a little prick of the ear, and then they're just basically testing the amount of lactate that has accumulated in your blood, and then there's certain ranges that based on where you are, it tells you whether you've like crossed LT1, LT2. So that's generally. But for most normal people, that's one, it's an extra piece of gear that you need to buy, and also like from listening to professional athletes on like how you use them, it's like you need to do it in a very specific way and like right there in that moment. So if you're not doing it with someone that's like trained to be doing this, or you've really been shown how to do it and do it in the proper timing, you can get very funky results. So that's definitely a very advanced thing, I would say.
Yeah, and even I know again through the nice Lionel videos or some Christian videos from some professional triathletes, like they could tell right away even by feel, and they compare the number that they get a skewed result. Like even getting a drop of sweat in the reading, or the reading is a little bit more humid than in another location. If you're in a pool or outside in the desert, they could get a different reading, and they'll literally you could see it. They go, no, that's not right. They'll go do another interval, come back, measure it again. So it's very finicky from what I could tell.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking of pros, there is this very interesting like Norwegian method of training, which I think we should give a shout out to because who knows, maybe somebody, shout out Adam, might be aggressive enough to give it a try one day, which is the double threshold training. So this I came out of Norway. I think it's Jacob Ingebrigtsen who really popularized this training, which is essentially you do two high intensity sessions per day at near lactate threshold. And so that means in the morning, you're doing a prolonged sustained threshold piece. And then in the afternoon or evening, you go out again and do another intense session. And sometimes maybe that's even more intense than your morning session. And I guess the results don't lie. He's a super successful runner, and people that are following this Norwegian method are catching medals everywhere they go.
Yeah, I feel like we should put a heavy disclaimer on this Norwegian method. The people that adopt this training, this one's specific for Adam based on a recent run he did after having a hurt ankle. I don't get any funny ideas. They have crazy aerobic bases and are training like crazy. So don't just go jumping into double thresholds when you run, 30 kilometers a week and have been running for 6 months. That'd be crazy.
Okay, that's perfect. I'm running under 30 kilometers a week, so I could do it.
Yeah, no, this is a good warning, Andrew. It's used by elite athletes only, and requires very careful recovery. Like this is these people's full-time job, and like you say, they've been running for decades, not just months. So avoid overtraining. Don't go out if you're a newbie and try the Norwegian method. Not at all. It's just kind of a tidbit of what the elites are doing. Now, I do have a hot take related to threshold training. Truly believe that a lot of people who think they're training at threshold and haven't been looking at the data on VDOT or not knowing their FTP are probably actually going out too hard on their threshold workouts. I know even myself right now, despite the knowledge that I have and the data that I have backing up what I should be doing my threshold pieces at, I often continue to push a little bit too fast, a little bit too hard. And I see it in the data, I see it in my runs, and I always come back home and I'm like, yeah, I crushed that workout, but I didn't hit the goal pace. I was under it. So I would just caution athletes to try to hit those paces, even if you feel like you can go faster. That's not always the point in that training block.
Agreed. I think that is a sneaky little tidbit there too. Is you could always go too hard on your threshold. I think, and I am guilty of that as well in the last training block. I know, and we talked about it earlier. Everybody's threshold work is tailored to personal to themselves personally. So for example, I was running with Brian on some threshold workouts, and for example, that was just a bit too fast for me. For example, I could have been going a few seconds slower, but I decided to, crush the workout with Brian, the speedy man. And don't even get me started with Andrew trying to keep up with him. That'd be zone 7. So yeah, just really make sure if you're on your threshold piece, you just do your own pace for that prescribed workout. That is a great hot take.
Yeah, I think for a threshold, if you're trying to do it with someone, doing it in some sort of loop. I do a lot of my threshold workouts on tracks. Tracks might not be everyone's thing, might be a little bit too boring and too short. So even like a nice park loop so that, you can be together and like see each other, but you're not necessarily like, I'm going way above my threshold just to try to keep up, because it can be pretty tempting.
Yep, very true. I don't know. Maybe we'll give the fans another, or the spectators, I might say, another hot take. I had a quick hot take up above as well. I think FTP indoor FTP tests are inaccurate.
Do you think they're boosting people's stats,
Boost.
or
Yeah, it's a total boost.
really?
Yeah, I think there is an outdoor FTP. We might have to do some research on this, but I think there is an outdoor FTP and an indoor FTP. The indoor is so controlled that I think that the outdoor is a more accurate, FTP number for your threshold power.
Here's a question though: isn't that control good for testing?
That's
For
what I
less
think.
But it's
variables?
too good. It's too good.
I think outside is deflating it. I think it's the
Okay,
opposite.
maybe, but what's real life?
Okay, you know what I demand is I demand a follow-up when we have an FTP related episode where we dive into kind of the three tests. How I think this basically means we need a conversation about FTP.
This is Mythbusters, I think. This is a
Let's
Mythbuster episode.
go do some research, Ty, and bring it back to us in a few episodes. I'm excited for that chat.
Frig, I like that. But we need to test it outdoors too, so I gotta wait till it stops friggin' snowing.
Well, that's perfect. Maybe right before the BIM ride, we can have an episode about it.
Or during.
Or during. But I think that's the next thing we need to talk about as we come to the end of this episode. Got to give a shout out. We've been planning it. We've launched the communications, and the sign up form is available if you go to the Boys in Motion website. That's Boys in Motion, boys with an I. You can sign up for the 2025 BIM Ride. Now, that is happening on May 30 and 31. It's a Friday, Saturday. You can join us for both days or just one day. Now, what are some of the features of this ride, guys?
One of the big new features of this ride is that we're going to be riding in 2 separate packs. And that will be my pack that I'll be leading will be the chat pack, because the fellas in the other pack have just gotten a little bit too quick for me. So we're going to have a little bit more fun. It's going to be a little bit more casual. We'll probably be riding about 20 to 25 kilometers, but it'll kind of be depending who comes out, but it will be
Per hour.
per hour.
20 to, yeah.
Yeah, 20 to 25 kilometers per hour and around 100 kilometers per day. So it's still a nice long ride. And depending where you're at, it might still be, quite the push. It might be your longest ride, your first century ride, which will be awesome. But it is definitely welcome to all. And it'll be no drop. So no matter where you are, we'll get you across that finish line.
The big question is the A group, is that a no drop?
Not A group. It's the Pain Train. Let's be real. So branded the Pain Train. This is kind of the elite and experienced riding pack. Generally, speeds will be fast. We're aiming to do it's going to be 30 kilometers plus for the day. We might see those kind of climb as the peloton gets going, but it's 2 days, approximately 160 to 180 kilometers per day. Like I say, it's fast. We encourage you to be an experienced rider for that pack. You'll know if you belong there. And it is also a group ride, no drop. We are riding together. We actually have some exciting segments that we're going to go after as a group to try to KOM them on both on day 1 and day 2. So it's really a team ride. Now, it's not just riding. This is a full weekend of festivities, food, and fun. So what are some of the stops and the food you're most excited for, guys?
Well, I'm very excited for the carb load after day 1. The day 1, we're going to be, exhausted. We're going to be stopped in Fort Erie, and we're going to be starving. We'll have some catered food coming our way, and we're just going to be loading up, getting ready for day 2. So last year was fun. We did go out for dinner, but I think this year will be a lot more organized and well set off with those dinner plans. So very excited for that.
Yeah, and for those that join us, so we're going to be organizing that catered dinner where we'll be ending in Fort Erie. And then also on day 2, we're going to be doing a barbecue at the finish line. So that's all going to be organized as well if you're part of the ride. But I think for me, what I'm most excited for are those coffee stops mid-ride, just to get that nice refuel. And I always love stopping at RPM, getting one of those sticky buns and a nice espresso. So that I think is really what I'm looking forward to, is one, having a baked good, having coffee, and then it will also be an opportunity for the pain train and the chat pack to hopefully reunite as long as things work out, chit chat about their day. And if for anyone in the pain train, it's just a little bit too much for you and you're feeling broken, the chat pack is happy to have you.
Yeah, exactly. So this is the key, and it's worth a little more explanation. Throughout each day, we will have a coffee stop first. Like the first stop in the morning is at a cafe. Both groups will meet there, and then even on day 2, we're going to meet not only for our first coffee, but then hopefully for lunch as well as we make our way back to Font Hill for that barbecue. So you can feel free to kind of test yourself out in the pain train at the start of day 1. Maybe it's too fast. You can hop over to the chat pack for the rest of that day and then try your luck again on day 2. You can join, like I say, for 1 day or 2. And something else that we're excited to be cooking up is Team BIM jerseys for this ride. So far, every single one of the double-digit signups that we have on the Google form has requested a jersey. So I'm excited to see everybody in those beautiful matching jerseys.
That's going to be legendary.
We'll just be feeling too fast and stylish in that BIM jersey.
Yeah, the last thing to touch on, and we'll leave the conversation here, is just in terms of costs. So if you're doing both days and you want that team jersey, so all of the meals, the accommodations on that night, and the nice barbecue at the finish line, that's $100 per rider, $30 for the jersey. So if you don't want the jersey and you're riding both days, that's $70 per rider. If you're just doing one of the 2 days with the jersey, that's also $70. And if you're only doing one single day and you're not grabbing that jersey, it's $40 a rider. So flexible options there, and we really tried to make this as cheap as possible for everybody to get you out riding. So we hope, we can accommodate everybody who would like to join the ride.
It's going to be great. I'm excited. I'm already recruiting an Ottawa convoy, so I know we already have a few signups from the 613, so it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, love to see it. And yeah, just to repeat it, for signups for that BIM ride, it's at boysinmotion.com, boys with an I, but if you mess up and put a Y, it will also work. And then just hit that sign up link, read all the details and fill it out, and share it with a friend that you either want in that chat pack or along for the ride in that pain train. Yeah, and I think that just about does it for this week. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Boys in Motion podcast.
Don't forget to join our Strava club for lots of nice updates. We do encourage you to share this episode with a friend if you think they could benefit from threshold training.
I know I can. I'll definitely be listening to this one in the car. And remember, this is a big disclaimer on this one. We are not professionals. Double threshold workouts are based for elite athletes, and the advice and tips we have are based on our experience and some research that we've done before the show. Always consult with a healthcare provider or a professional before making any changes to your workout regimes.
And as always, keep moving, stay motivated, push that threshold, and we'll see you next time on the Boys in Motion.